The question hit Jennifer Walsh like a sledgehammer to her already broken soul. Standing at the Family Feud podium in her simple gray sweater, the same color as the shame she'd been carrying for 5 years, she felt the familiar crushing weight of a decision that haunted every moment of her existence. The studio lights felt too bright for a woman who had been living in the shadows of her own guilt since the day she sold her baby for $50,000. "What would you undo?" Steve Harvey had asked. And those 4 words unlocked a vault of regret so deep it threatened to consume her completely. Jennifer's hands trembled as she gripped the podium, thinking about the son she'd given away for money, the child she'd carried for 9 months only to hand over to strangers for cash. The silence stretched as she tried to find words for the most shameful decision any mother could make. It was Friday afternoon, at the Family Feud studios in Atlanta. The Walsh family had traveled from Detroit, Michigan, hoping this game show might provide some joy in Jennifer's life after years of depression and self-hatred. Her sister Lisa and their parents stood behind her at the family podium, offering support for a woman who had never forgiven herself for choosing money over motherhood. The game had started with Jennifer's heart already heavy with guilt. The Walsh family was competing against the Rodriguez family from Texas, and Steve was working his usual magic with the crowd. But Jennifer couldn't focus because every mention of family reminded her of the son she'd lost by choice, not by chance. 5 years ago, Jennifer had been 29 years old, unemployed, and facing eviction from her apartment. Her boyfriend had left when she told him she was pregnant. Her parents had cut her off financially, and she was alone with bills she couldn't pay. That's when the private adoption agency approached her with an offer that seemed like salvation. The couple was wealthy, desperate for a child, and willing to pay $50,000 for a healthy newborn. Jennifer told herself she was being noble, giving her baby to people who could provide everything she couldn't. But deep down, she knew she was selling her child to solve her financial problems. "Selling my baby," Jennifer whispered into the microphone. The words came out like a confession at a trial, raw and unfiltered. The studio fell completely silent as everyone processed the devastating honesty of her answer. Steve's face immediately changed as he realized the depth of pain behind her words. This wasn't just about regret, this was about a mother who had commodified her own child. The cameras captured every emotion crossing Jennifer's face as she struggled with a guilt that had consumed 5 years of her life. "Tell me what happened," Steve said gently, stepping closer to Jennifer. His voice carried the weight of someone who understood that some stories required careful handling. The audience leaned forward, sensing they were about to hear something that would challenge their understanding of maternal love. "I was broke," Jennifer began, tears already streaming down her face. "Facing eviction, no job, no support from family. I was 7 months pregnant and desperate." She paused, struggling to continue with the most shameful part of her story. "A private adoption agency offered me $50,000 for my baby," Jennifer continued. "They said he'd go to a loving family who could give him everything I couldn't. I told myself I was being selfless." The financial desperation behind her decision was evident to everyone in the studio. Steve waited patiently as Jennifer gathered the strength to continue with a story that had been eating away at her soul for 5 years. "But I wasn't being selfless," Jennifer admitted, her voice breaking completely. "I was being selfish. I took money from my child like he was a commodity, like he was something to be bought and sold instead of loved and protected. I signed the papers when he was 3 days old," she continued. "I held him for exactly 10 minutes, then handed him over to strangers and took their check. I've hated myself every day since." The brutal honesty of her confession hit everyone in the studio like a physical blow. The audience was trying to process the moral complexity of her situation: desperation versus maternal love, survival versus sacrifice. Jennifer's pain was evident, but so was the magnitude of what she'd done. Steve Harvey made a decision that would define this moment forever. He looked directly at Jennifer and asked the question that cut to the heart of her pain. "Do you know where he is now?" The question acknowledged her loss while recognizing that her son was still out there somewhere. "No," Jennifer replied, fresh tears flowing. "The adoption was closed. I don't know his name, where he lives, or what he looks like now. I gave up all rights to ever see him again." The finality of her situation made her regret even more devastating. "I Google 5-year-old boys sometimes," Jennifer admitted. "I look at pictures and wonder if any of them could be him. I go to playgrounds and watch children, hoping I might recognize something familiar in a face." The desperate searching behavior revealed the depth of Jennifer's longing to reconnect with her son. Steve could see that her regret had become an obsession that was preventing her from moving forward with her life. "What would you say to him if you could?" Steve asked. The question shifted focus from Jennifer's guilt to her love, giving her space to express the maternal feelings she'd been carrying for 5 years.
"I'd tell him I'm sorry," Jennifer said without hesitation. "I'd tell him that giving him away was the biggest mistake of my life. I'd tell him that not a day goes by that I don't think about him and wonder if he's happy.
I'd tell him that I didn't give him away because I didn't love him," Jennifer continued. "I gave him away because I was scared and desperate, and I made the worst decision any mother could make." The distinction between lack of love and poor judgment was important for everyone to understand. Jennifer's regret wasn't about not loving her son, it was about letting fear and desperation override her maternal instincts. Behind the scenes, producers were unsure how to handle this unprecedented emotional revelation. This had gone far beyond typical game show territory into moral complexity and maternal regret. But Steve Harvey recognized that some moments required witnessing rather than entertaining. "Jennifer," Steve said, his voice carrying the weight of profound understanding, "you were in an impossible situation. Desperate people sometimes make desperate choices that they regret for the rest of their lives." His words offered some context for her decision without excusing it. The audience began to respond with visible emotion. Parents throughout the studio were imagining themselves in Jennifer's situation, facing homelessness while pregnant, with no support system. Some were judging her harshly, others were feeling compassion for her desperation. "But regret doesn't change what happened," Jennifer said. "My son is growing up with other parents, calling someone else mama. He doesn't even know I exist, and that's my fault." The self-blame in her voice was devastating to hear. "You made a mistake," Steve replied. "A huge mistake that you can't undo, but that doesn't mean you're not his mother. You carried him. You gave him life. You made the hardest choice any woman can make." His words reframed Jennifer's identity from baby seller to birth mother. What happened next would become one of the most complex moments in television history. Steve addressed the cameras directly, speaking to America about a crisis many people never discuss. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're seeing is why we need better support for pregnant women in crisis. This woman made a terrible choice because she felt she had no other options," Steve continued. "We need to make sure that no mother ever feels like selling her baby is her only way to survive." His words elevated Jennifer's personal tragedy into a larger social issue. Behind the scenes, adoption advocacy groups, who had been contacted by the production team, were standing by to offer Jennifer resources and support. This wasn't just television anymore, it was education about the complexities of adoption, poverty, and maternal regret. The conversation continued with Steve, helping Jennifer understand that her regret, while painful, demonstrated her capacity for love and her recognition of the magnitude of her decision. He encouraged her to find ways to honor her son's memory that didn't require self-destruction. "Your son has parents who love him," Steve said gently. "You gave him life, and they're giving him the life you couldn't provide at that time. That doesn't make you evil, it makes you human." The perspective offered Jennifer a different way to view her decision. Jennifer's face began to change as she considered Steve's words. The guilt didn't disappear, but it was joined by something else, the possibility that her decision, while wrong for her, might have been right for her son. The audience witnessed a woman beginning to separate her regret from her son's well-being. "I dream about him every night," Jennifer revealed. "Sometimes he's angry at me for giving him away. Other times, he's thanking me for giving him to parents who could take care of him." The dreams reflected her internal conflict about the consequences of her choice. Steve's response was both gentle and firm. "Listen to both messages. Feel your regret, but also trust that your son is being loved. You can't undo what you did, but you can learn to live with it. The advice offered Jennifer a path forward that acknowledged both her pain and her son's presumed happiness. The episode would later become a resource for women facing crisis pregnancies and considering adoption. Jennifer's story showed the long-term emotional consequences of both poverty and hasty adoption decisions, highlighting the need for better support systems. 6 months after the taping, Jennifer had begun volunteering with a pregnancy crisis center, helping other women in desperate situations explore all their options before making irreversible decisions. Her experience gave her unique insight into the desperation that drives terrible choices. Jennifer's relationship with money changed completely after sharing her story. She became extremely frugal, donating most of her income to organizations that support pregnant women in crisis. Every dollar spent felt like a reminder of the price she paid for $50,000. The therapy Jennifer began after the show helped her process her grief and guilt in healthier ways. She learned that while her decision couldn't be undone, her regret could be transformed into advocacy that might prevent other women from facing similar desperation. The letter Jennifer wrote to her son, knowing he would never read it, became a form of ongoing communication that helped her maintain their connection. She wrote about her regret, her love, and her hopes for his happiness with the family that raised him. The annual memorial service Jennifer holds on her son's birthday has become a gathering place for birth mothers dealing with adoption, regret. The shared experience of maternal loss through choice creates a unique support system for women carrying similar guilt. Jennifer's story inspired legislation requiring longer waiting periods for voluntary adoption, surrenders and mandatory counseling for birth mothers considering placement. Her regret became a force for protecting other women from making irreversible decisions during temporary crises. Today, Jennifer works as a counselor specializing in adoption trauma and birth mother regret. Her personal experience gives her credibility with clients who might otherwise feel judged for their feelings about adoption decisions. The gray sweater she wore that day hangs in her closet next to a baby outfit she bought for the son she'll never raise. Both serve as reminders of loss and love, representing the child she gave away and the maternal love that never died. The $50,000 Jennifer received was eventually donated entirely to organizations supporting pregnant women in crisis. The money that had once seemed like salvation became her way of ensuring other women had choices she didn't feel she had. Letters from adoptees who were placed due to their birth mother's financial crises arrive regularly at Jennifer's office. Some express understanding and forgiveness, others express anger and abandonment. Jennifer responds to all of them with honesty about her own experience and regret. The support group Jennifer facilitates for birth mothers has helped dozens of women process their complex feelings about adoption decisions made during desperate circumstances. The group provides a safe space for discussing regret without judgment or platitudes about doing the right thing. Because some mistakes are too big to undo, but not too big to learn from, and some regrets become the foundation for preventing others similar pain. Jennifer Walsh thought selling her baby was solving a problem, but she learned that some solutions create bigger problems that last forever. The miracle that happened on that Friday afternoon in Atlanta reminds us that desperation can drive people to choices they'll regret forever, but that regret can become a force for positive change. Jennifer's shame became advocacy. Her guilt became guidance for others facing similar impossible decisions. Her story continues to educate people about the complex factors that drive adoption decisions and the long-term emotional consequences for birth mothers. The conversation about supporting pregnant women in crisis gained a powerful voice through Jennifer's willingness to share her most shameful moment. The adoption agency that facilitated her son's placement eventually implemented stricter counseling requirements and longer waiting periods because of publicity from Jennifer's story. Her public regret created systemic changes that protect other women from making hasty decisions during temporary crises. The organization Jennifer founded now operates in 12 states, providing emergency financial assistance to pregnant women facing eviction, homelessness, or other crises that might pressure them into unwanted adoptions. Her personal tragedy became prevention for countless other families. Medical social workers across the country now use Jennifer's story in training programs, helping them understand the long-term psychological impact of poverty-driven adoption decisions. Her willingness to share her pain publicly has improved how professionals support women in crisis. The research study Jennifer participated in about birth-mother regret became groundbreaking literature in adoption psychology. Her detailed interviews provided insights into how financial desperation affects decision-making and long-term mental health outcomes for women who place children for adoption. The advocacy work Jennifer does with lawmakers focuses on expanding safety nets for pregnant women in crisis. Her personal testimony about the consequences of inadequate support has influenced legislation providing emergency assistance to prevent adoption decisions driven purely by financial desperation. The Crisis Pregnancy Center, where Jennifer volunteers, has seen a significant decrease in adoption placements since implementing the comprehensive support services she helped design. When women have real alternatives to poverty, fewer choose to place their children for adoption. Today, Jennifer's office is filled with thank you letters from women who decided against adoption after receiving the kind of support she never had. Each letter represents a family kept together through community assistance rather than separated by desperate circumstances. Because some decisions haunt us forever, but the haunting can become a force for preventing others' similar pain. Jennifer Walsh learned that $50,000 couldn't buy peace of mind, but her regret could purchase protection for other vulnerable mothers facing impossible choices.